Hello, my name is Rich, and you are watching an Indie Plus panel. This panel is being held over Hangouts on Air, so if you are watching right now, we have the question and answer turned on. This is 9 Eastern on March 22nd, 2015. So if it's not that time, then you probably won't get any questions answered right away. But if you do have them, feel free to jump in. The topic of this panel is hacking game design? Let's see, the conversation about this began on an episode of Narrative Control, an excellent podcast that's led by Sean Nittner. And in that, he spoke with Luke Crane, who posited the idea that is game hacking and game design, are they one and the same? That conversation continued with a future episode of Narrative Control that just recently came out with Rob Donahue and Vincent Baker, who came on and talked about dissociated from Luke, talked about that thought process and had a conversation that we want to continue here with some people who are game hackers, game designers, gamers, people, and I'm really interested to hear their opinions. We have a number of questions. I'm talking really fast, so I'll slow down. We have a number of questions that I've already received from people who follow Indie Plus, and we will be posting those. But if you do have a question and you'd like to ask that, I'll do everything I can to try to move it up the queue and ask that as well. This event does adhere to the standards, the community standards of Indie Plus, and if you want to find out more about that, then go ahead and Google Indie Plus community standards. And on Google, that's like the very first thing you find. If you go on another search engine, I can't guarantee it, but keep looking, and we will very soon, hopefully by the time you see this, you'll see the community standards will be linked on the indieplus.org website. Please be advised that this event may include explicit or abusive languages. We may drop some curse words. It could happen. This is going to be an exciting conversation. So, with all of that behind us, now I'm going to introduce people only by the alphabetical first name, not by their level of importance in my heart. So we'll start with Brian Engard of Dangerous Games, the creator of Becoming, a game of heroism and sacrifice, and the writer of a Fate super setting known as Venture City. How are you doing tonight, Brian?
I'm doing good. Yeah, I've been playing video games all day, so I'm in a pretty good mood.
I love the shirt. That's very cool. So
Thank you very much.
You're an uber gamer. All right. So next we have Eloy Lasanta of Third Eye Games, the creator of games like Apocalypse Prevention, also Wu Jing, and Little Mermaid. What am I saying? Mermaid Adventures, which is one of my son's favorite games. How are you doing today, Eloy?
I'm doing great. Glad to be here.
Fantastic. Next we have Nathan Paoletta of NDP Designs, creator of Annalise, Carrie, a game about war, and the pretty excitingly new hack on an Apocalypse Engine worldwide wrestling RPG. How are you tonight, Nathan?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to destroy some dreams and hopes. That's always my goal for these kinds of things.
Wait, that's not this panel. That's the other panel. It's the after panel. And then next we have Sarah Richardson, who's the driving force behind Maidens of Mayhem, which unfortunately is not a rock band. Co-organizer of Contessa and co-creator of the upcoming Bluebeard's Bride. How are you tonight, Sarah?
Really good. How are you?
I'm great. All right. So is hacking game design kind of contentious? And so I'm going to lead off with one of the questions that I think really drives to the heart of it. And I'm going to start with you, Brian, and then we'll kind of work across. Jason Morningstar asked, what's the link between hacking, designing games, and status? And how does this relate to imposter syndrome?
I'm going to start by saying that I think the link between hacking and game design is that they are the same thing. And the way that that relates to status is that I think it's a false dichotomy that is set up more for gatekeeping purposes than for creating any useful distinction. And I think that often leads to imposter syndrome because people feel that they cannot call themselves game designers until they hit X milestone, which is going to be a moving goalpost that is different based on who you're talking to. I mean, that happened to me. It was like, I'm not a game designer until I've gotten something published. I'm not a game designer until I've been paid for it. I'm not a game designer until it sells this many. I'm not, it's like you keep on trying you keep on pushing that goalpost back in order to, I guess, make your accomplishment more special when it happens. But ultimately, it just winds up creating a cycle where people who have every right to call themselves game designers feel that they cannot, and feel that their work is less valuable as a result.
Now, Eloy, what about you? Do you have a different take on that dichotomy?
Not so much, honestly. I designed my own systems. I currently have 2, and I have 2 others in the works. I mean, I do design my own systems. At the same time, when I release another game that uses the same system as a game previously, I'm basically hacking my system that I created to support the next game. So does that mean that I only designed the first one and the second one I didn't? No, it's there. The designing is there. I do freelance stuff as well, so that means I'm taking somebody else's system and I'm writing stuff for it and trying to do stuff with it. I'm essentially hacking, the established system for that company as well. So, it's designing and hacking, like Brian said, it's basically the same exact thing. As it relates to imposter syndrome, I don't know. I mean, that's kind of a weird one, because then does that then make everybody a game designer? So the answer kind of to that is yes, because even a GM at home who just makes up a random house rule, they've basically designed something that makes their game work for them. But how it pertains to status is a whole other bag of tricks that I won't keep talking. I'll let somebody else go ahead and handle that one.
Oh, that's good, though. I think you really got at the heart of it. I think we can all kind of put to bed that we feel that hacking and game design are really, really close together. And I like that you brought up house rules, because that was one of the things that kind of comes through my head. When I think back to my college days, and we had this 3-ring binder of all of our hacks to the D&D 2nd edition we were playing, and we layered in GURPS, and we layered in the alignment system from Palladium or Palladium, however you want to call it. Were we game designers? I don't know. Nathan, what are your thoughts about the status part of this?
I think the arrow kind of points the other way from my perspective, in that because of imposter syndrome as kind of a shorthand for what I think almost everyone feels of, I see other people doing a thing that I admire and enjoy, and I want to be part of that, and I want to do my own thing, and I have these goals for myself, but am I really going to meet them? Am I as good as that other person, etc.? Because we feel that, that's kind of what drives this idea of the different levels of status in any community. This person has achieved this thing, so I'm going to put them in a certain place, while, maybe if I get to where they are, then I will be in that place. But I guess the real point I want to make here is that, unless I'm in some kind of weird bubble, I've never talked to anyone who's like, oh, I can't believe people are designing games, right? We all love games, and we all love seeing other people making new things and bringing them into the world. And so where the status stuff kind of comes in, it's like this whole weird, and I think, it's hard to talk about, because it's this whole weird mess of perception and ability to participate and achievement of your own goals and all that business. But I mean, that's all driven by the fact that I think we all feel like there's more for us to achieve in our game design, our play, our membership in the community. And that's the stuff that's hard to talk about and weird to deal with. Hacking and designing games is on a continuum of activity, right? Is kind of my perspective on the first part of the question. I don't know if that really answers anything, but that's what I was thinking about while the other guys were talking.
Nathan, I think it's really interesting, because when I think of your games, the games that I was first exposed to in indie design, they were completely original, and now you've kind of come full circle, like you said. You know, your World Wide Wrestling is using the Apocalypse engine, so I was really excited when you agreed to come onto the panel because you have that different perspective. And speaking of different perspectives, I really want to hear Sarah's thoughts on this because you're currently working on, you know, is this your first published game, right? I just want to make sure.
Yeah, that will be. I don't think my little micro game about goats counts necessarily, even though you could say that was my first published game.
Micro games about goats totally count.
Yeah, Brian's.
Okay.
Okay, so this is your second game.
Yeah. Well, the part I can speak to a little bit is the idea of status gatekeeping and imposter syndrome, because since Bluebeard's Bride will be my first official hack that I'm doing with Marissa Kelly and Strix, and so whenever I went to Metatopia as part of developing it, I was surrounded by a bunch of newbie game designers who all refused to call themselves designers. And it wasn't so much like, oh, well, I'm doing a hack, so that means I'm not quite as much a designer as like Whitney, who has developed her own system. It was just like this little shivering huddle of fearful people who are like, someone's going to find us out and they're going to tell us we don't belong here. So I don't find the distinction between, hacking and game design to be useful in any meaningful way, except to maybe discourage people who might not normally, who might see it as a barrier to trying to do something very cool.
Nice.
I mean, and honestly, in the context that we're using hacking a lot of the time, it's really just it's licensing is basically what you're doing. You're licensing, but there's no license that you need because it's free, so it's just out there, so that we're calling it hacks. But it's just you're using that system for your game. It's been happening for years. It's not really anything new.
Right. I mean, just because Bluebeard's Bride is powered by the Apocalypse engine, just because it's an Apocalypse World hack, doesn't mean that we aren't doing game design. I mean, we're designing moves and playbooks, and just because we're taking, the convention of 2d6 plus a skill, that doesn't lessen the design work we're doing.
Right. Like, let me tell you about a couple of hacks that I'm working on that you may have heard of: Dresden Files Accelerated and Shadow of the Century. By the time they're done, they'll have taken about 2 or 3 years apiece to finish. Like, are they not game designed because they're based on an existing system? Is that a useful question?
I mean, it's not really a useful question, right? Like, I have yet to see anyone be like, no, designing a specific part of the game is clearly not a game design activity. It comes down, from my perspective, more, as I mentioned before, how there's a continuum of the design process, and it can start at this very nascent point where there's nothing and you're just trying to figure out something from scratch, or you can be leveraging some kind of existing technology that's already out there that you already know works for a specific kind of goal you have, and then you layer your stuff on top of it of your unique viewpoint that you're bringing to the project. Is how I see that.
And I really like that you talk about it as a continuum, because there's a lot of stuff in between those 2 points, right? Like, I wrote and designed Becoming, which is ostensibly a unique, not a unique, but like an original system. But like, I pulled stuff from Fade, I pulled stuff from other games. There's some stuff from Fiasco in there. There's if you're a game designer, you're probably also playing games. You're consuming the things that you're designing. Otherwise, why would you be designing games? It's not like anyone gets into this industry for the money. So if you are consuming games on a regular basis, you can't help but have your viewpoint and your design methodology informed by what you consume. So on some level, like, pretty much any game you design is going to have elements of other games in it, because you are unconsciously taking these elements from games that you like and tweaking them and making them work for your thing. It's all sort of like a big circle of borrowing from everyone.
I would also, I guess, to speak to the point of the status. Whenever I think of status, I always think of there's people in the industry that are up here and I'm down here. But that's going to come up a lot of the time when you're talking about hacking, because Vincent Baker is like a name that everyone knows, and he's up there in that status there. Now, every people who hack his system for their own games are kind of leveraging his status in order to make their game, get their game in more people's hands. They like this system, so anybody who likes the system is going to pick it up. Same thing with anybody who licenses the Savage World system or any other system out there. But there is a certain level of status, like the person who designed that system, kind of, like they kind of have to have a certain level of status before people jump on that, I guess is what I'm saying. I don't know.
No, I get you. I'm glad you brought up the Savage Worlds, because I remember when Apocalypse Prevention, when you were porting it over, and I thought that was really an interesting choice. I'm going to switch to another question. Nathan, I'm going to start off with you. This question came from Adam McConaughey. What can hacking teach us about game design?
So that's first of all, there's the question is encoding this false dichotomy between hacking and game design. But I think the activity of using an existing game as part of your process can be super valuable in the sense that it's another design constraint, actually. And I think this is kind of what, if anyone's listened to the podcast that you mentioned at the beginning of the thing, this is kind of what Vincent, I think, was getting at when he was talking about creating asking a question with Apocalypse World, and then people are answering with hacks, right? Is that when you're hacking something, you're kind of saying, all right, this system that I'm using, or these elements that I'm pulling out of it, they're achieving something, but they're also constricting my design space in a certain way. And then that's actually a challenge to you to use your now constrained space productively. So I think it can teach you a lot about like what you actually are good at is something that I've found. Like if you're really excited about hacking something, using a baseline and going off on your own, and you do the part that's really easy, and then there's a part that you need to do that's really hard, that can teach you about like, oh, I'm actually really excited and pretty good at doing X, but I actually am not very good at connecting this with some kind of currency feedback system that I see should be in here, but I don't know how to do yet. So in that way, it can teach you how to analyze your own work and your own design methodology, which is really helpful for me. I'd like to kick this one over to Sarah from here, just because you're coming into, because you're kind of hacking, using a hack as your first game in a way. So I'm kind of interested, because I'm coming to it from the other end. I'd like to hear the other perspective from your end.
I really felt the tag you're at. So I guess my perspective is I totally agree that it sets up a false dichotomy there about what is what. But I can say that being able to do this on an existing framework, basically it's kind of like whenever I went to art school and to draw, first they made me draw from life before I was allowed to go draw from my own head, because you have to see what works before, and what is real, and what a hand actually looks like before you can go and draw it without looking at it. So I would say that coming to it, having played Apocalypse World and a bunch of hacks, and then trying to do my own, it's this nice, comfortable framework to play with that's kind of teaching me, the phrase that comes to mind is ruthless cannibalism. because basically I want to take everything that I love and cannibalize it to make the thing that I'm making more awesome. So if I play someone else's game and I'm like, oh, that feeling we were searching for in Bluebeard that I couldn't quite figure out how to explain that, oh, I found that somewhere else and now I'm going to bring it back to my own design. And I think also, yeah, there are probably things that I am not as interested in designing. I'm not sure I have a good example off the top of my head. But if I'm not interested in designing it, being able to see how someone else did it, yeah, that's totally useful.
Cool. Thanks, Sarah. Look, Brian, what have you learned from? You talked about in becoming that you used a lot of different games. Are there any particular things that you learned from other games or hacking those games to teach you in new designs? Are there? Is it just like a mode of play? Are there die systems, actual mechanics that you pull in, or all of the above? What has influenced you the most from hacking to some of the things that you've done that are designing other games?
So I think it's a bit of it's all of the above. What I have, since I started really designing games all the time, I have gotten into the habit of whenever I play a new game, I'm paying attention to how the rules interact and what effects they're having at the table and how that makes me feel at the table and what it encourages me to do. And I'm sort of logging these things in my head as I play, and when I sit down to design something, that is all stuff that I pull from. I have lifted entire dice mechanics to play around with, and I did that with Becoming. It started off a lot more derivative of other works than it ended up being, and as I refined and tweaked things and tried to get things to create the experience that I wanted at the table, it changed into something else. But I think that's really the thing that I most take away from hacking apart other games or playing other games is I look for what does the game say that it's what's the experience that the game says that it's giving me, and then how does it give me that experience? And then when I create a game, I try and mimic that as much as possible. I try and say, what is the experience that I want to create here, and how do I make sure that happens? I do it when I read game books too. I'll read and I'll be like, oh, I could, if I tweak this here, it would do this and stuff like that. It's something you start not being able to stop yourself from doing once you get in the habit of doing it. But yeah, it's like if you want to learn how to build a toaster, you take a toaster apart and you look and see how the things fit together. It's the same kind of thing.
Thanks. Eloy, did you have anything to add about hacking and what it's taught you about game design?
Yeah, actually, from my experience, and I haven't done any hardcore hacking except for a conversion of API over to Savage World. But what I've learned because there is a difference. They are both definitely game design, but they do come from two different standpoints. I've designed my own systems, and I have also hacked. And I would actually say that hacking is harder to do than it is to just design a new system. Designing a new system, you just say, I kind of want it to do this. All right, I'm going to make this thing up, and it does that now. Whereas if you come at it and you have a framework that you have to kind of stay within, because if you go too far out of bounds, it's no longer that framework that you want. If you started adding, cards and all kinds of different kinds of dice and all kinds of things to the system that uses D6s, then it's no longer really recognizable as that system anymore. So there is a certain kind of limitation that you have when you're trying to hack something, because you're trying to use what is there to its best ability to give you the emotion and the feel and the setting and the mood and everything that you want without changing it too much to the point that it's unrecognizable. And that is actually super hard.
Neat. Neat. Sarah, I'm going to kick off with you. This question's from Marshall Miller. And I felt like you almost kind of dipped your toe into this one, so that's why I definitely want to lead off with you. How does hacking compare to fanfic?
I actually really like that question. So I'm going to say that this is not going to apply to every hack or every designer, but I would say that overall they're incredibly similar. Because fanfic is really, it's all about, writing a love letter to something you care passionately about. And you kind of see that with the hacks, right? Because let's say, to be completely irreverent, Night Witches is Jason Morningstar's love letter to those female pilots, right? And he could have sat down and instead just written a fanfic about two of the pilots finding each other through struggles and falling in love. But instead he, made this game so we can together tell that story. So being able to take that, or even more popular properties, like I see a lot of supernatural fanfic, a lot of supernatural hacking, like I want to play Dean in the game. Like these things are just completely interwoven. And interestingly, the fanfic community is, I believe, primarily dominated by women creators. So once again, it's like there's a different barrier of entry and a different definition of success that might work for different people to come forward and start making stuff.
Interesting. I really like that point of view. I'll jump over to Nathan. I haven't heard from you in a little while. How do you compare hacking and fanfic?
I'm not really qualified on this one because I actually don't participate with fanfic. Like I don't read it or write it. So I'm not really.
Well, let me rephrase it. All right. So here, when I read that, and I think it's cool that Sarah took it literally. When I read that, the first thing I thought of was every fantasy heartbreaker I've ever read is fanfic to D&D. It is. I love this game with all of my heart. I wish it would do encumbrance better. I wish it would do, some kind of 3-phase attack system better. Like that to me is how hacking and fanfic compare. And I think I just answered the question.
Yeah, you don't need us. You can go ahead and do this thing. No, I mean, I think the coming from a place of love is definitely part of it. I think, I mean, I'm sure it's certainly possible, right, to be a mercenary and be like, okay, what system is like popular and well accepted, and this game idea I have that's kind of agnostic as to how it actually functions in play. How can I get them to the most people with it, right? But I think the most successful games, to me, from the personal standpoint, are ones where like you can see the creator's passion for what they're doing. And if their passion for their subject leads them to building upon an already existing structure, it's because that structure speaks to what they're doing, right? So to use my own thing as an example, for Worldwide Wrestling, the way that the Apocalypse World engine structures iconic, repeatable moments that happen over and over and over, but have different sets of outcomes depending on the circumstances and what you care about in that moment, speaks deeply to how professional wrestling works structurally. And so that was like an insight that led me down the path of doing it as a Powered by the Apocalypse game as opposed to coming up with new stuff, because Vincent already did the heavy lifting for a couple features that really worked really well with what I wanted out of it. So from that direction, the passion being there will kind of solve a lot of potential problems.
Thanks, Nathan. Brian, Eloy, I'm sorry I kind of talked over this question a bunch, but do you guys have something that you'd like to add?
May I suggest you change the question to make them admit what fanfic they like?
Ooh, wow.
So I'm gonna
hack this question. No, go ahead.
I'm gonna answer that partially by basically saying that I am basically participating in creating a game version of Dresden Files fanfic right now. The only thing that that I guess differentiates is that it's officially sanctioned by Jim Butcher. Like Dresden Files Accelerated and the Dresden Files role-playing game before that, and the Paranet Papers that's about to come out, like all of that is pretty much just pure fanfic. So, like, in one sense, I think that whether you're hacking or designing games, if you're working on like a licensed property, you are writing fanfic. I mean, look at Margaret Weiss Productions. Look at all the beautiful fanfic they write. And then the other thing, one way in which hacking can be a lot like fanfic, but can actually offer maybe more opportunities than fanfic, is that it can actually act as a gateway into the industry with more frequency, I think, than fanfic does. If you take Mike Olson as an example, he got onto Evil Hat's radar by writing a blog called Spirit of the Blank that was all just sort of like musings and hacks about Spirit of the Century, and now he writes for Evil Hat. So, like, that kind of thing happens.
And I would like to go ahead and state officially for the record that I read a lot of Naruto fanfic, usually involving Naruto and Sasuke in yaoi relationships. They're actually really entertaining. That being said, I think everybody knows the biggest piece of fanfic that has been released in like the last decade, and it just had a movie that made $500 million, and it's called 50 Shades of Grey. And that was a piece of Twilight fanfic that blew up into this thing that made them a lot of money because they just filed off the serial numbers. Now, how that relates to hacking is kind of what Brian had just said, was that if you write a hack that is really good, it can get you on the radar. A friend of mine, Clint Black, who is like one of the main guys over at Savage Worlds, he got on Savage Worlds' radar because he wrote this little thing, and he wrote a thing called Necessary Evil, and then they said, "That sounds really cool. Do you want to write that officially?" And he said, "Yes." And then it was history at that point. But it is kind of amazing what you can do when you really just write something that you love and people take notice. I find a lot of my freelancers that way. You know, if I see somebody writing something about my game, I go, that was really good. Maybe you want to come write something for me. That would be awesome. You know, so I mean, it definitely does happen.
Cool. Thanks. I want to stick with you on this one. This question is pretty interesting. It talks a little bit more on design. This is from Philip Nitzel. What makes a game hackable? There are tons out there, lots to choose from. What makes a game hackable from your point of view?
I don't know. I guess, I mean, if we go with the definition that we've had so far during this conversation, that all game design is, you know, all hacking is basically game design, then any game is hackable, which would mean what makes a game hackable? The fact that it's a game. I mean, you can hack Yahtzee if you really have something you really want to do with those D6s. You can be like, well, actually, what I want is I want to have a God versus Satan version, so I'm going to have 3 7s and 2 6s is a new one that I've now added to Yahtzee. I mean, you can do, well, that's not right because 7 is not something you can get on a D6, but you get my point. But you know, it's every game is hackable. I guess that will be my standard answer there.
Cool. Nathan.
Yeah, so that is, I mean, that is obviously true. But at the same time, there are decisions that the designer makes about a game that can make it more or less transparent as to how it works and the fall-off effects of like changing this thing and how that affects this thing. And this actually loops back to those original conversations because Luke Crane, for example, talks pretty in depth about how Burning Wheel is a product of a design process where things are extremely fine-tuned over a period of years and multiple editions and multiple supplements and everything. And one of the reasons you don't see a lot of Burning Wheel hacks other than maybe some life path stuff or like a color kind of reskinning process is that you change a couple things and then all of a sudden you're completely unable to kill someone with a sword in your fantasy game or something because you changed how like the relationship of weapon and armor and healing and something. So like that's one end of a spectrum where the other end in this conversation I think is Apocalypse World or Fate, where it's structured with all these chunks, all these pieces, almost in a modular fashion that have very clear links to how one affects the other. And you can kind of turn the dials and move the switches and replace pieces without the entire thing falling apart in some unforeseen future once you actually get it to the table and start playing it. I think there is a skill, obviously, to doing it, and it becomes easier over time and if you have more experience playing those games. But so I think that's a feature where it's more transparent about how it works. Lady Blackbird's like that too, where it's so compact and specific about how the different traits work and how they relate to the characters and everything. That for a while, there was a couple of years back where there was a ton of Lady Blackbird hacks because it was very accessible and very transparent. Right. So I guess that's what I have to say about that.
Yeah, mentally raising my hand on the Lady Blackbird hacks. Sarah.
Yeah, Lady Hackbird was the term, if for those of us who remember.
Yeah.
They're great, but it's a low barrier. It's a very low bar to jump to mess with Lady Blackbird because it's short, clear, concise. Only so many moving parts.
Yeah, and thank goodness there's Blaze in the Dark because I was beginning to think that John was just gonna keep hacking his own game. He'd like spit out one a month. It was awesome. Sarah, what about you? What makes a game hackable for you? Why'd you choose Apocalypse World?
Well, the hack night that I attended, which is where Bluebeard's Bride was born, we were given the choice of either, basically either like Apocalypse World or Fate. And really, Apocalypse World is a better suit for horror, is what we came up with. Because, whenever I run Apocalypse World, really terrible things or really gonzo things happen. So we figured that, Apocalypse World would be the perfect fit for that. For me, a lot of it, like why I would hack a game, for me, a lot of the test there is, do I love that particular game? Because I'm going to be spending a lot of time with it very intimately, and I need to make sure that I'm okay with that. And does it do what I want to do? But I also wanted to mention, I think it's funny, talking about what makes a game hackable is now with the people hacking their own games and the hack of the hacks. So you not only have stuff like the one famous Kickstarter of a apocalyptic version of Dungeon World as a hack, but the other day, I forget who it was, messaged me and Nathan and said they had hacked together Bluebeard's Bride and the Worldwide Wrestling. The look on your face, Rich.
Yeah, no, because they're like, we're gonna do the one wrestler, but all their different gimmicks, all their different personalities, being played as one character.
So taking an aspect of one hack and hacking it into another hack, and we have hacked, Infinity Loop, and it's fun.
Brian, I don't know. Have I hit you on this one? I don't think I've hit you on what makes a game hackable. I want to hear it.
I think one of the primary things that makes a game hackable is the person reading or playing the game and deciding to hack it. Like, different people will look at the same game and see completely different things. Ryan Macklin, a little while ago on his blog, hacked Candyland to do Chinatown, and I never would have thought of that. And like I'm just like thinking about, like, I have this thing that I call the Jedi rule, and it's not really like a yardstick that I use to measure games or anything, but it's like, if I'm reading a game, I always look to see, can I do Jedi with this? And if the answer is yes, then great. But like, I was just going over my catalog of games in my head, and I was like, ooh, Don't Rest Your Head, that would make a great Jedi game. But it's not necessarily immediately obvious on its face. So it's like, one person can look at Candyland and be like, there's nothing here, how would I hack this? And another person could be like, structurally and narratively, this is the same as Chinatown, let's just do this. Right? Like, it depends on the person.
Cool, Brian. I'll stick with you. This question, I like this one. Oh, shoot, I was trying to make sure. It was Josh Jordan asked, what's the worst possible way to hack a game?
In my opinion, it's a weird question, because, like, I'm not sure there is one worst way to hack a game. There are certainly ways that you can hack a game where it'll come crashing down around you, and then you'll have to go back to the drawing board. But this may not be answering the question in quite the way he wants it. But I think the worst way to approach hacking a game is in a very mercenary way. Like, if you're like, hey, I want to make a game about this because it's popular, and I'm going to use this system because it's popular. Like, that's not a great reason to hack that setting and that system together, because they aren't necessarily well suited to each other. Not all games are equally suited to all settings or all genres. Like Sarah was saying, like, she had the choice between Apocalypse World and Fate to do a horror game, and Apocalypse World is clearly the better choice there. Like, Fate is more about sort of gonzo action and doesn't do horror all that well unless you really significantly hack it. Like, you have to do a lot of work to get there. But that doesn't stop people from saying, like, well, Fate's popular, it just had a really big Kickstarter, so I'm going to do my horror game with Fate. And then they wind up with something that doesn't quite do what they wanted to do. So,
yeah, I'm just going to jump in and say there was at least one Kickstarter of note that happened last year where they set stretch goals as, we'll just do hacks of this thing, and it was really awkward as a potential consumer. I'm like, well, I do like the system that's part of their stretch goal, but I don't think that this thing fits in that mold. So. Yeah,
exactly. Like, that actually happened a lot with Fate right after the Kickstarter. There were a lot of people who were saying, like, Fate version of the game, yay! And that was successful to varying degrees. So.
Yeah, and in fact, and I'm monopolizing, and I apologize, I'm a bad moderator, but I actually have seen conversations of people saying there's a Fate army who will come on to Kickstarters and demand that there be a stretch goal for a hack of Fate. I mean, I'll just say, I've seen that conversation take place. I find it very amusing.
I think that is to some extent true. So.
And that happens all the time, like on forums or anything like that, where people will go on there and be like, you know what, I'm looking for this kind of game that does this and this, and somebody will go, why don't you play it with Fate? You know, it's just like, okay, well, if Fate can't be the answer for everything, I like Fate just as much as the next guy.
Like, that's there's a misperception that Fate is a universal system.
Right.
It's not. I don't think there actually is such a thing as a universal system. But like, it's a very flexible system and can do a lot, but it does a very specific kind of story. And if you try and do something that is counter to that, you're going to wind up with weird results. So
exactly. Well, and to what Brian was saying is that like no system is going to suit every genre, everything. I ported over API over to Savage Worlds because I really thought that it fit Savage Worlds, and then as soon as I released that, people said, "So when's the Savage Worlds conversion for Wuxing coming out?" And I said, "It's not, because it doesn't fit that game in the slightest." So we are working on a Fate version of my game Part-Time Gods, but that's because Fate really fits that game. And I wouldn't do an API version of Fate. That's just not something that I would do. So you really kind of do have to be selective with what you're pairing in terms of your hacking.
Cool. Nathan, what's the worst way to hack a game?
The worst way to hack a game is not having played it before you try to do something with it. I mean, I think I totally agree about like you can kind of part of your process can be failing at hacking a game, but that's not a bad thing. That's just you try something, it doesn't work, you learn something, and you move on. I think if you're going to put a value judgment on it of best to worst, picking up a book, reading it, and being like, that was a great system. I'm going to go ahead and do my Powered by the Apocalypse Sailor Moon game, or whatever. Having never played any Powered by the Apocalypse game, you're robbing yourself of the ability to make an informed choice about the tools that you're using. And I think that's probably a pretty poor strategy.
Sarah, do you have some input on worstest?
I'm too caught up on the idea of a Apocalypse World Sailor Moon game now. Like,
I knew he broke you. I knew it. I saw the reaction.
Success.
Go, Nathan.
Success. I told you at the beginning. No, actually, someone emailed me asking if there was a Powered by the Apocalypse Super Sentai game, and I was like, I'm sure someone is working on it somewhere, but that's outside of my interest zone. So, if you happen to know about one, let me know and I can pass the word along. But
I've heard some rumblings about two things that are very similar to that, but neither of them are far enough along to pass along. But I'll make sure if it happens that I share. But I mean, you guys I think you covered, pretty much all the points. I would say also one of the worst possible ways to hack a game is just because everybody else is doing it. Like, don't try and make games if you're not really into it. It's like you don't have to. If there is any feeling of like, peer pressure or anything. But yeah, that's about it.
Cool. And Brian, you've got Jedi. My thing's Shadowrun because I hate the system, but I love the setting. Every time I see a new game.
I am right there with you, man. In fact, there's a Powered by the Apocalypse Shadowrun hack called Sixth World, I think, that is amazing.
It's actually a Dungeon World hack, and there's also the Sprawl, which is kind of a cyberpunky Shadowrun-y thing.
Man, my thing is just like, I'm going to do Shadowrun, I'll play Technor. That's sort of like what I do because that's already for cyberpunk.
Yep.
Yep. But yeah, I love me that setting. But like these days, my preferred way to engage with it is with the Shadowrun Returns video game.
Don't rest your head does an interesting thing with Shadowrun. Ryan Macklin also wrote that.
Don't rest your head does interesting things with a lot of things.
Sarah, I'm going to stick with you, and this probably is going to be our last question. This is from Joanna Piancastelli. And she asked, what's your favorite game that qualifies as a hack? And you can qualify it however you wish.
My only problem with questions like these is I'm going to forget a game that I really love, and later I will kick myself. But I'm going to cheat a little, and I'm going to say Apillion, because what is better than being little baby dragons who have to save the world? And it's not just because Marissa's making it. It's I played the game before I got to know her, and was just so incredibly excited that it's like My Little Ponies, but I'm a dragon. It's like childhood fantasy come true. Thank you so much. So yeah, I'll go with that.
Nice, nice.
That's a great answer, by the way. I just want to point that out. I actually really like Apillion. I actually talked with Marissa when she was first coming up with the idea, and I was like, yes, do that. Make that game, please. Please make that game. I need to play this game. So yes, I'm right there with you.
Well, Eloy, what do you think though? What's your favorite game?
My actual answer, because I haven't gotten to play Apillion. I've only I've read a little bit of it, but I haven't gotten to play it yet. But my official answer, I guess, would be Monster Hearts. I really dug that game. A friend of mine runs it locally, and she runs it like a lot. So I jumped in a couple of games, and it was amazing fun. So I would say, yeah, Monster Hearts.
Nice. Nathan, what about you? Can't say your own game.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't. I don't know. I'm trying to think. I'd have to go look through my stuff. I'm really bad at remembering like names and things. I don't know. I actually, I mean, the stuff that I've played recently, I really liked Urban Shadows. I thought they were doing a lot of really cool stuff with the engine, in addition to it being a very cool game. So that's off the top of my head, but I'm sure if you asked me again tomorrow and I had a chance to actually think about it, I would have a more interesting answer. Because I think there's a lot of games, and the reason I say that is not because that's not a great game, but because I think there's a lot of games that very intentionally were inspired by or pulled stuff from other games that happened before Apocalypse World and Fate, right? Like, there are older games that incorporate other pieces, like Ian Malcolm's Hot War, which is a World War II spy adventure game that incorporates the trust mechanics from The Mountain Witch, which are like the killer app of that fantastic game, and that kind of stuff. So I think there is, because this conversation is happening now in this context of games that kind of are popular engines. So I just wanted to make a final note that like this has been happening for a while. There are a lot of games out there that have been incorporating stuff from other games before Vincent and Evil Hat opened up specific platforms to do so. It's my little mini rant to finish off my portion.
That's a good one. That's a good one. All right. Well, Brian, you're going to bring us home with your favorite game that qualifies as a hack.
It has to be a published game?
It's not part of the question, so I guess not.
Okay.
He has to have access to it, though, Brian.
Well, no.
People are going to go play it.
Like, the thing that actually qualifies as my favorite currently, you don't have access to the part that makes it a hack, but you have access to the thing that it's based on. Yeah, I think probably my favorite published game that is a hack. It's Dungeon World. I love me some Dungeon World.
What's the part that we don't have access? Go ahead, Brian. What's the part?
All right. So I am in Lenny Balsera's home campaign, which is we are going through Eternal Lies, which is the part that you can just buy. But instead of using Trail of Cthulhu for the system, he has taken Cortex Plus and hacked it to do Trail of Cthulhu. And it's amazing. It is like, it's amazing. I mean, Lenny Balsera knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
This surprises no one, I think. But yeah, it's the hack that he has created does a really good job of incentivizing you to hurt your own character constantly. Like your character is sort of a resource that you burn through in order to succeed. It's like, well, you failed. How badly do you want to succeed here? Like, what would you like to sacrifice? And I just really dig that.
Nice.
So.
Nice. That's good. That sounds a little Don't Rest Your Heady, actually.
If I can actually have a secondary answer, I want to say Yahtzee.
I'm going to make a
D7s.
ruling. I'm going to hack this question to say that you can, Eloy. Go ahead.
I was going to say Yahtzee played with D7s. Boom. Best game ever.
Wow. That's a great note to end it on. I appreciate everyone who sent in questions. I appreciate everybody who helped out with this. And thanks a lot to the panel, Sarah, Nathan, Eloy, and Brian. Thank you all for making time and coming on here and sharing your opinions on game designing and hacking and the fact that they're one and the same, but not. But they are. But they aren't. Thank you all so much. And again, if you like this, I'm going to point to a corner. I've got a 50-50 shot. There's a subscribe button right here, and I'm just going to stick with it because I'm pretty sure that that's where the subscribe button is. I really should write notes like on my monitor to tell me where to point. So if you like this and you want to see more of the panels, we've got an entire series of panels. There are dozens of them, as Eloy now knows, because he said, "What, do you guys do panels? I got to check this out." And I said, "Here's a playlist, dude." So check out our YouTube channel and give us some feedback. And if you got a burning question that we didn't answer and you want to let us know, then hop onto the YouTube video. I'll be keeping an eye out on that. We'll do our best to get you some answers. Thank you all so much for coming on. I really appreciate you making time. And have a great night.